I'm very excited to have all of you here today. We're going to speak on the topic that I felt kept coming up over and over in discussions that we were having around culture with different coaches. I go back after these panels and do one-on-one interviews with each of the panelists. And something that always comes up, we're always just talking about culture and things, never X's and O's. But the topic that kept coming up was how to handle adversity, ultimately that perseverance, and how do you teach that? I personally think it is a learned skill. Some of us are born into adversity. Some of us make it ourselves. So anyway, that's what I wanted to dive into today. William Shakespeare once wrote, "Sweet are the uses of adversity." So today I want to dive into how many ways can we teach and model handling adversity and persevering in the moment to student athletes and our future leaders, because that's what you guys are developing. Let me introduce our guests. First, I have to say, as I told them, we'd be here all day if I were to list all of these coaches' many accomplishments. So first, I'm going to say that every one of them are the owners of many district titles, many regional tournaments and championships, and many Coach of the Year honors. Today, we have approximately 14 state appearances and 6 state championships represented on this panel. That's changed just a little bit. If you haven't noticed, Kit Martin's not on this call today. I got a call from Kit about 9:15 this morning, and they've had something happen in their program this morning or last night. Don't feel it's my part to share that, but she just didn't feel she could do the call today. And under the situation, I totally understand. So Deb Harris, being the great friend she is, the great basketball person she is, in the one phone call, split second, she's, yes, I'll do it. I'm on the way to school. So Deb, I appreciate you getting on here and doing what you do. So our first guest, I will introduce Deb Harris, 25 years in education, 15 years at McKinney High School. She's currently the women's basketball coach, assistant campus coordinator, and this year took her team to the state tournament. And Deb would never tell me how many wins she has because she's too humble. Teresa Durham, head coach at Allen High School. Appreciate you coming, Coach. 2 state tournament appearances for Coach Durham. Won the state title at China Springs. I believe it was Midway. You also took the state, or no, Allen. Recently took Allen to the state tournament. Very grateful you could be here with us today. Tom Inman, one of my best friends, one of my mentors, retired 1 year ago. He was previously the head men's basketball coach at Plano Senior High and at Grand Prairie. Also helped Coach Gratz at Bowie. 3 state appearances, 1 state title at 2 different schools. Tom, appreciate you being here. And then last but not least, Coach James Mays, head coach at Dallas South Oak Cliff, 5 state tournament appearances, 4 state championships, 28 years coaching, 26 at SOC, which is just amazing. I can't imagine staying more than a couple years in any one place at anything. So I'm blessed you're able to join us today, Coach. I want to thank each and every one of you for being willing to share. Thanks for being here. Thanks to those of you that helped me secure these guests. So before we get into our topic, I got to thank once again Brent Flynn and East Bay. They're going to raffle off a backpack again today. So about halfway through, we'll try to get that raffle done and let you know who won it. So I want to thank Brent for supporting what we're doing here. Like I said, we'll announce that here in a little bit. So coaches, my first question today is going to be, how do you define adversity and perseverance in your program? And then once you've defined it to your team, when do you introduce this adversity to those student athletes? And that's in relation to maybe the start of school. I know I personally started mine on the Thursday school started. I was putting them in adversity, running a timed mile. Uh, Coach Harris, could you speak on that, please?
Um, I, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You know, it's kind of like everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. I mean, I think that is one topic that you have to spend some time talking about. You can't just teach kids to survive adversity. And it took me a while to figure that out, but you have to put them in certain situations. And I think before you can really define what that is for your program, you have to ask your kids, what do you want to accomplish? I mean, obviously, there's plenty of people on here that have absolutely kicked our butts over the years. And, you know, competing in our district, you're going to be in adversity every single time that you step on the floor. And I think that's part of the reason we've been successful is because every district game, it felt like a playoff game. But we spend a lot of time putting practices together, and we'll put certain grit drills together with our kids that they know that during this time, this drill is going to suck, but there is a start to it and there is an end to it. We have found over time that kids really kind of look forward to that. They want to know how many grit drills that we're doing. But if you just put them in a drill that is really physically demanding and you don't have those conversations with them, they don't understand what flipping that switch means. So we spent a lot of time doing that, and I think it's been really helpful for us, for them to just practice and come in into game situations where we say, hey, we're in grit mode right here. I mean, you've got to survive it. And just being, you know, having practiced that, I think it has been a huge part of us being successful.
Okay. Coach Mays, how do you define adversity at SOC? And, you know, when do you introduce that to your players?
Well, being that we working in the inner city, we have a unique situation. We have a lot of kids with disadvantages, either home disadvantages, you know, a lot of financial disadvantages. That's a big one. So we have so many disadvantages, but we take that and we turn them into advantages as far as the motivation factor, because in order for a kid to survive and get through that whole thing as far as what they're dealing with on a daily basis off the court, you have to really put them in a mindset of dealing with adversity. I'm talking about daily. It could be situations, you know, take for instance, I was talking to one of my former students yesterday that was actually hired at school, and we got to talking about another kid who's now a business owner. He's a business owner. He is very successful in the clothing line. But his story, reason his name came up dealing with adversity, he actually was a homeless kid. One of my kids, this was the first kid that I ever had dealt in a homeless situation, to the fact that we had to get him services to get him placed so he could basically have basic tools every day that he needed, meals, a place to sleep at night. And the kid took all of that. He never quit, graduated, was a great player for us. In fact, played on one of our state championship teams, but he was a homeless situation. But just dealing with adversity, he's not the only one. There's so many kids that deal with those advantages every day as far as off the court. And so we try to put them in the mindset of just persevering through that. And the staff, obviously, you have to be equipped to even deal with that, not just from my seat, but assistant coaches. Coach Weefall, I mentioned earlier, one of my assistant coaches, he's on now. Coach Patterson, who's the head coach at Lincoln, you know, he was on the staff back then. Lincoln actually won the state championship also. He deals with a lot of adversity in their spot over in South Dallas. So just putting them in the mindset of daily, of getting through. And the biggest piece of that is the support, because they need so much support. If it's just getting on the phone, making a phone call for services, for help, for support, those are the things we have to do. But at the same time, like I said, one of the most important pieces to that is offering support for that kid who's going to give you their blood, sweat, and tears daily on that court. You have to offer support. And that kid cannot feel like they're in that situation by themselves. And so, and obviously this breeds loyalty. This breeds determination. This breeds a lot of other things as far as dealing with your character individual character when they can persevere and get to through those things. As far as on the court, as far as adversity, we try to structure our practices where we have a lot of competitive drills, a lot of drills that demands that they fight through adversity. We don't call fouls and scrimmages and things like that. You know, of course, that can be a real stressful situation, especially when you have kids that play so hard and play so aggressive. Other kids, they don't take too kindly to that, obviously, but that's teaching them to fight through adversity. And then overall, most recently, most recently, what we've had to deal with as a school was probably unprecedented. Everybody, well, if you were paying attention, you know some of the deals South Oak Cliff was dealing with as far as our building situation. Our building was in a very, very bad situation, literally at falling in. And so we had to relocate in the middle of a school year. We moved out of our school in December. And once we moved out, we didn't have a practice. We haven't had a practice facility in the last 2 years. And so, you know, in October when basketball season started, we basically the district rented us a facility. And so we could practice from October to whenever the season ended, and that would be it. We wouldn't hit a court again as far as our court for the next time October rolled around. We dealt with that for 2 years. And even though we deal with that situation, we still persevered. We still won 2 district championships, made the playoffs, won over 20 games. And this is all without a gym. And so you constantly, daily, have to talk about fighting through adversity and just taking what life gives you and you try to make the best go out of it. And it all starts with the attitude from the coaching staff, myself, first of all, just making sure we stay positive and offer support during those times.
Okay, thank you, Coach Mays. Coach Durham.
Well, one thing that we've done to combat, I think, this adversity, number one, we had to define it first. This year, we decided that from the very beginning, before we even went to the floor and did anything, we just had team meetings with kids. We let kids define roles, expectations, what you wanted, or what they wanted to accomplish for the year. And it was kind of amazing, you know, some of the obstacles that they wrote down, some of the challenges, what they perceived as adversity, and then maybe what an older school coach, what I thought was going to be adversity. We weren't really on the same page. And so, again, I think sometimes having more meetings with kids and letting kids have some ownership of the team makes them, I don't know, gives them a little bit more buy-in so that when those tough times do come, you know, you feel like you have some kids that are rocks that you can depend on. So, like, for us this year, we did meetings. We talked about the things because, like, again, our district is very competitive, and that was our goal is to do well in that. And so trying to lay out some of those potential challenges, you know, those close games, just the pressure of being able to handle it. We just spent a lot of time talking with kids and letting them, doing some individual meetings. You know, we did post players, guards, talked about things that they struggle with. And so with that, as a coaching staff, we tried to design things that would challenge them every day through specific drills. And again, I think drills, for sure, you have to have a consequence for everything. And so we started the season with some of the same drills at the beginning of practice, and we did them all year long. And it was amazing. In the beginning, some of my kids just laid down and didn't compete because the requirements to, you know, be successful in the drill, we couldn't accomplish them in the beginning. And so it was neat through the season to see as kids really bought in and had developed that toughness. Like, I refused to have to run again because we didn't make our goal, you know, scoring wise or whatever. To me, that it was slowly, you know, the kids bought in and they took pride in that, like, I'm not going to run today. I'm not going to do this. And it helped our team, you know, come together a little bit. So I think it definitely teaching kids these days how to handle adversity, because, you know, so many of our kids have things, you know, just fixed for them by their parents, and they don't know how to handle that, how to struggle and how to fail. And so I thought it was very important to teach them that, how to fail, you know, through a drill so that then you win in a game. And again, we just design things like that. I'm a big believer in the weight room in the off season. You know, we challenge our kids to build up some of that mental toughness, because, you know, our kids don't want to do it. And unless we kind of make them do it, they don't want those personal challenges. And so again, I think that everything that you can do like that in the very beginning sets the tone for the entire year.
Okay, appreciate it. So Coach Inman can kind of tie some of this in together because he's coached in both instances, being at South Oak Cliff in the inner city and then coming to Plano. So T.I., can you share a little bit on that?
Yeah, the first thing I was going to say was one of my favorite lines of all time. I put it on the back of T-shirts and things. Is tough times never last, but tough people do. And I really do believe that in my heart. I grew up with Ken Inman. He was a pain in the rear end. I mean, I had no choice but to become tough because he didn't want to listen to it. And I think all of us coaches who have had a lot of success are the people who don't tolerate excuses and people who insist on a standard of achievement, like you talked about. You know, there's always a consequence for everything that you do. Okay, well, it was kind of weird because when I first came from SOC, I left in '89, about 3 years before James came. And when I first went to Plano, my girlfriend says to me, she said, "So Tom, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She goes, "What are you going to do? You're going to have to coach white kids." And I said, "Well, you know, I'm white. My parents are white. I went to a white high school. I'll probably adjust, I guess." And so then I sarcastically said, "Well, what I'm going to do is coach them just the same. I'm not going to listen to their whiny crap, and we're going to have to get tough." So I was a little concerned because at that point in my life, I was very rigid in the sense that I thought, if you're a tough guy, you're a tough guy. You can't teach it. If you're soft, can't teach it. What you are, let it be what it is. And as I went through the years of coaching, I came to realize that's not true. Now you can't, if you assigned everyone a grade of 1 to 10 on toughness, you can't make a guy who's a 2 into a 10, but you can make a 2 into a 5 or 4.5, maybe a 5 to a 7, maybe a 8.5 to a 9.5. But I do think that toughness is achievable. So I ran into a drill one time, and I called it a tough guy drill for no other reason than I wanted the guys to associate, I can do this with I'm a tough guy, because no guy wants to hear he's soft. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what age you are. No one wants to hear you're soft. So what we do is we do this drill where I'd roll a ball, and they'd have to slide on their shorts or whatever and get on the ground and get the ball. Then they've got to come in there, and they've got to run somebody over and take a charge. Then the guy gets up and takes some pad and beats him while he has to finish 3 times. No fouls called, nothing. I don't care. And one of the points I wanted to talk about, I believe in being very efficient at practice. You know, I think you should have a practice schedule. I think you should assign times. I think you got to get through things. But I think sometimes that's a cop-out. So when we did tough guy drill, it was on time. We might be here 20 minutes. We might be here an hour. I don't give a crap. It's up to you guys. You guys figure out how long this is going to take, because you're going to take a charge and you're going to get on the ground, and then you're going to finish through a guy would use those football, handheld football pads. And you're going to beat them. The only rules were you couldn't hit them below their belt and you couldn't hit them in their face. Everything else is fair game. Play through the contact. And what happened was some guys would be, like you talked about, some of your girls quit a little bit and they lay down, and then some of them learned to kind of step up. Well, what was really cool was when a guy who didn't really want to take a charge would take a charge, the other guys would get all jacked, kind of like that, the whole enthusiasm level would pick up. And then they would see, you'd catch them doing things like the tougher guys might encourage the younger, softer guys to finish the drill. Come on, man, come on, you can do this, you can do this. And at the end, when it's over, whether it takes, again, 20 minutes or 60 minutes, you're tougher than you were when you started. And then you have to sell people on this, because I made a comment or I made a note to myself that teaching people to be tough, which basically means play defense and rebound, is like it's the eating your vegetables or do the homework part of basketball. Nobody wants to eat their vegetables if they can just jump in and have the steak. No one wants to do the homework if they can just get an A by having it given to them. Well, you don't pass the test unless you do the homework, and you don't get healthy if you can't be healthy if you don't eat all your vegetables. Well, we can't be a good basketball team if you won't commit to making the little guy plays, because the year that we won state, James was there. Remember, I showed up really early and I was hyper and I couldn't, more hyper than usual. I was going crazy. I'm bouncing off the walls, and we're talking about, like, obviously his best player is Darrell Arthur. Well, Shady's still playing in the NBA, so that's pretty safe. He was your best player. But you guys didn't win state because Shady was better than someone else's first. You won it because maybe Kevin was, or whoever happened to be your second and third was better than their thirds, right? And I had to sell one of my 4th best players on being a 4th best player, that on any other team he might be the best player. And I said, but we're going to win because of you, not those 2 pretty boys. And I pointed to John Robertson and Joe Fultz, because they were the ones that got recruited and played on TV and all that crap. And the other guys were the guys carrying the water. But I said, we're going to win because you carry the water, because those guys, they got their job's pretty easy. Now, you still got to make them take a charge. You still got to make them do all the work. But I just think that you could force adversity upon people to make them deal with. And then 2 other quick things, and I'll shut up. I learned a drill. It was only about 6 or 7 years ago. We used to do it at Bowie. It's called change drill. And what we would do is you'd have the basketball, and as soon as the coach blew the whistle, the guy with the ball would just slam the ball on the ground, set it down, and then anybody except the guy guarding him could pick the ball up. So it's pure transition. Go, go, go. It's just completely disjointed, complete nightmare. I always thought that was good. I used to put 2 people on John Robertson every day. Just beat him up. I'm not going to call anything, John. Quit whining. Just shut up. Play through it. When you get to college, you're going to have to play through that crap anyway. A ref's not going to save you. And then we also used to play like full court, 6-on-5, if it was 7-on-5, whatever it took to kind of simulate. Because the very last thing was scheduling. Scheduling creates toughness. Because we were 8-5 after 13 games the year we won.
We're going to get into that, T.I.
Oh, yeah, I'll leave. But I mean, the whole point came down to I wanted my guys to have to play great players because we could have been 13-0. You could schedule 13-0. Every one of us can schedule 13-0, or you could schedule 500. And you know, I almost feel sorry for y'all having to coach with all the social media garbage because people taking shots at you and stuff like that. But you know, remember, you're the basketball coach and you forgot more than they know, and they just did a Holiday in Select last night. So it's just on toughness. It's just on them doing the little things because it's the very, very last thing I'll say is this. When it comes to offensive evaluation, everybody wants to shoot the ball, but very few can, right? And defense, very few can, or very few will, but everyone can. Think about that. How much difference can you make on your team because you insist on other people doing the things? Everyone can play defense, and very few guys, they can spend the rest of their life working on their offensive skills, and they'll never be very good anyway. So the place you can improve the quickest and improve your team the quickest is through toughness and defense. So thanks.
Couple of little ahas I picked up in there. Deb talked about in their grit drills, they have a start and a finish. And I think that's important to teach anybody that this too shall pass. And I think those drills that have a time and an ending teach that this is going to be over, but just hang on. Because we all know that the person that hangs on the longest is often the one that wins.
Yeah.
And then also Coach Durham mentioned pride in overcoming. I think if you teach your kids pride in overcoming those adversity, man, they look for adversity so that they can go out and say, look what we did. Well, look what we overcome. And so I think those were some ahas that some of you, we should probably write down and keep track of. A little quote from Benjamin Franklin: "The things which hurt instruct." So on that, I want to get into scheduling. Roughly 12 to 16 months before your season starts, I know successful coaches are looking at that schedule for the next year. Who do we need to play to accomplish what we need to accomplish? So what I'd like for you to do, we're going to start with Coach Mays, is just share a little bit how you use your pre-district, your tournament scheduling to prepare for the storms ahead and that adversity that we know as coaches is going to come.
Right. I'll start with the tournaments. We start with the tournaments that we can get the most games in. I love the structure now that they have the pool play tournaments. And then once you have the pool play, then they bracket you on that last day or the last couple of days. I love those because you can get a minimum of 5 games out of those tournaments, in some situations, even 6. But I love those tournaments because, like I said, again, you can get as many games as possible. And at the beginning of the year, preseason is when you play these tournaments. Obviously, you need games. You need games to try to figure out your team. You need to figure out the roles, particular roles each individual is going to play. You need to find your tough guys. You need to find your guys who's going to step up at times of adversity during the games, primarily during that fourth quarter, especially of tight games. And so the tournaments, we schedule tournaments that we can get the most amount of games. Every season, I try to schedule at least one game out of town, one tournament out of town. That's for bonding purposes, for team bonding. And so we have to get away from the city. They have to get away from their families, sleep in another bed. This breeds camaraderie, obviously, because if you're eating together daily, playing together, traveling on a bus or a van, whatever it may be. Earlier, we used to travel on vans, but we travel on charters now. That just breeds closeness, all right? And that's the way we approach tournaments as far as scheduling. As far as the preseason games, we normally get anywhere from 7 to 9 games, depending on the district we're playing, the format you're playing in. And so what we try to do, and I got this from Chris Dyer. I was, when I first started my coaching career, Chris Dyer, who just retired at DeSoto, he hired me, and I was his lead assistant for 2 years. And he taught me this. He taught me to schedule as hard of games as you possibly can. The teams that will basically show you who you are. And I used to hear him all the time, you know, James, we got to schedule the hardest games. You know, we can't play these soft games. No soft game. And so that's my best Chris Dyer impression. But and that's what we do. And so and I've been doing that ever since. I didn't keep in mind as far as wins and losses, because that never helps. Because those 2 years when we played, when I coached for Coach Dyer, he was his assistant before he retired the first time. We used to take losses from good teams, and we also won a lot of games against great teams. In the playoffs, we would see a lot of those teams go down because their preseason schedule was soft, and that preseason or that end of the season record, it wasn't a true record. They could go, we beat teams in the playoffs that was 29-2, 28-4, whatever, a real gaudy record that looks real impressive. But when you broke down their schedule, most of those wins came against lesser teams early in the year preseason. And so that taught me to don't schedule the lesser teams in the preseason. And that's what we've always done. And sometimes we have, we've been blessed to come out with some wins, sometimes with a lot of losses, but it definitely showed us who we were. And so that's how we have to schedule. Our district schedule, like a lot of our district schedule, is not a very competitive schedule. You may have half of those teams that are very competitive in some years if you're lucky. But that didn't get us ready for the playoffs. And the whole end game, like Coach Yaya always said, is the whole end game is the playoffs, the third season. You have to get ready for the third season. So that's how we approach scheduling as far as adversity.
Appreciate it, Coach. Coach Durham, doing my research, read a quote from you. I was going to quote it, but I'll probably let you quote it, about your scheduling and the way you schedule. So I'll let you speak now. Thank you.
Well, I'm a lot like James. I try to go schedule the toughest preseason possible, and I could care less how many games I win or lose. Normally, we'll sit down and look at the region and look at teams that were successful, maybe made deep runs, look at the players that they have coming back, and then try to schedule them. I want my kids to have faced every possible type of team, and teams in their minds that they think are going to be the big dogs. Like, we started out with like DeSoto, Duncanville, Saxe. We just loaded up, in our schedule in the past, but that's what we try to do. Is I want our kids not only to play teams that year in, year out are making those big runs, that, players know who are the other players and what teams are going to be successful in their mind. So I would rather try to go play those teams before playoff comes, so that, we've played them once, whether it was good or bad. And again, then that means we have film, we know what worked on them versus what we did. And I think it's really important because it helps kids have a little more confidence, because we all know that when playoff comes, those times things don't always go like you plan. Kids get a little more nervous because they know that it's a one and done thing. And so again, I think the more that you can schedule adversity, and then the more types of different styles of teams, like, look at who's going to be running teams, who's going to be half court teams. The year that we did go back to state, we went to the Panhandle. I went up, called Joe, and we went up to Canyon, and we played in his tournament, and we were probably, by far the most athletic, type team, but we got to see other teams that played a whole different style, because again, I don't want my kids to freak out in the playoffs when some team slows us down. And, Coach Belcher at Plano he was masterful at that this year. He came out, we beat him the first time he came out and stalled. Like, it was like, I don't know, 3-1 at the, end of the first quarter. And again, our kids weren't used to that. We were, freaking out. So I think the more things that you can do to prepare your kids for the playoffs, the better. And then tournaments as well. Pick tournaments that, again, you're still going to see a wide variety of styles, because tournament games, those don't keep you home. It doesn't matter. It's just building your kids to where when it comes to the district and playoff time, your kids are solid. They know they're tough. They know, what it's like to play those tight games, to come from behind or be ahead. I just want my kids prepared. So I go play every tough game that you can. And, the only exception that I would say that as a coach you have to understand is sometimes if you know that your kids maybe aren't the most mentally tough kids, you've got to really do a good job of talking to them and making them understand just because they might lose preseason games has no bearing on their district play, as long as mentally they understand why they lost, and that, you know, it's preparing that it's a loss only if you don't learn. And if you learn from it, then you can always come back and get better. So that's what I think.
Appreciate it. We're going to get a little bit more into that and the communication piece in just a second. Coach Inman, I took my scheduling philosophy from you and the previous mentors, so share with us your philosophy.
Well, to pair it what they've been saying, the same thing. I just don't believe that. Well, you're doing your team a disservice if you schedule bad teams for several reasons. Number one, half the teams in Texas won't even get in the playoffs. Then when the teams get in the playoffs, a quarter of those are going to be gone in one round. So you're talking about the top 37.5% of all districts if you have an 18 district that makes the playoffs. So I've had guys that I'll say, how'd you guys do that? Oh, we won by 30. And I'll say, what'd you do? Oh, we press. That's what we do. I said, but you can do anything to a bad team. You press them. You cannot press them. You can play man. You can play zone. You beat them no matter what. And like James said, it's kind of a fake win. It's like fool's gold, but it turns green in the shower. And at the end of the day, if you go into the situation saying I'm concerned about my record, that's ego driven. If you're really concerned about getting your team better, then you should play as good a teams as you could possibly get and just weather the storm. Because we all take a bunch of garbage from people, because what kind of idiot could be 8-5 with all that talent at Plano? Well, one of my losses was to James. One of my losses was to Alan Gratz. One of my losses was to Dunbar. I mean, they're not exactly stiffs or anything, right? And one thing that I wanted to caution some of you younger coaches about, there's a couple of notes I made to myself. We used to play in a real typical high school gym where there's the gym or the basket is 6 feet from the wall. And when you get to the playoffs, you're going to start playing in gyms. And I watched so many teams fall apart late in seasons, especially as teams shoot threes more and more, which I'm not necessarily a fan of. Everyone shooting it. The depth perception issues in a big gym are a big deal. So you have to actually schedule opposite types of teams. Like James plays Highland Park every year. Dave and James are two of my better friends. And they play each other for a very obvious reason. HP needs to see SOC and SOC needs to see HP. And HP's probably won half their games. Dave gets ticked off because he wins the regular season game and James wins championships. But part of the reason James wins a championship is because he had the courage to play a team that might be the kind of team that will shock him one day. Now, what are we going to do when a team wants to play in the 40s? Well, you better learn how to do that, because one day you're going to have to do that. So I think you got to look for different styles of play. That's important. I think you need to play on the road. You can't hide out at home all the time. You just can't do that, because that's a false sense of security. You got to remember how the playoffs work. You got 7 rounds. You negotiate the first 3, but the last 4 are preset. So don't expect to play a regional or a state tournament at home. So if you do, you're kind of setting yourself up for that one. Just real quick, one last note. Oh, I think that you guys, as you walk your team through it, one of the coaches made the mention of the fact that you've got to tell them it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to play good teams. I remember one time Derek Daniels was at Dunbar. This is about 30 years ago. We were playing. They were great. They were undefeated. They went up and down 110 points. And Coach Stan Hicks I love Stan. Stan's in the gym one day and what's his name? The guy who just passed away, Randy Jennings, shows up, or the old sportscaster that passed away, came up and he says, Stan, he says, you think you can beat Dunbar? And Stan's an old country guy from Oklahoma. He goes, well, I ain't sure if we can beat them, but we're the only one who gets to try. And the whole point was, you can be anywhere that night. I've told my teams before, I said, look, when we lost to James, Shady blocked about 15 shots and made us look like idiots. And I said, look, we got our butts kicked. This isn't good, but we're going to win in March because we have enough courage to look at this tape. And I said, and I could have had you anywhere in the state. We could have been anywhere we wanted to be. We chose here. We chose Ellis Davis Fieldhouse in Oak Cliff because we need to be in an environment that kids aren't comfortable with. And I think that's very, very important. They have to feel protected, but I think Coach Harris said the phrase about being comfortable, be comfortable being uncomfortable. Well, if you expect to be comfortable all the time in basketball, get a new job.
Coach Harris, what are your thoughts on scheduling?
Well, I mean, I agree with everything that everybody said, but I think, at least from my experience and, coaching females, that you have to understand the pulse of your team too. I absolutely agree that you should not schedule people that you're just going to pound into the ground, because nobody's getting anything out of that. You're not, the kids are not, nobody is. But I do think that you have to have a hefty balance and those discussions with those kids, because, some of my more talented teams were maybe not some of my more mentally tough teams. So even if I thought physically we could handle playing the DeSotos and all those teams, the Duncanvilles early on, sometimes that comes back and it bites me in the end, because the kids have to have the confidence too. This year, we weren't the most talented team that we've had at McKinney High, but we had a pretty good mental toughness and a pretty good understanding of what our team was about. We struggled with some injuries all year long until we got towards the end of the season. And finally, so our kids had some of that comfort. So, I mean, that's probably the biggest shock for me, is how many people focus on our record. Oh my God, you got to the state tournament and you had 12 losses. And I'm just like, look at our freaking schedule. Look at our district, look at the people that we've played. Look at, who we've played without who. So I definitely, and in our district, you can't compete if you're not going to play a tough preseason. I mean, it will be very obvious that you will get thumped if you do not prepare yourself all year long. And I think our schedule, and certainly our district, helped us down the road. I mean, because there's a ton of teams that are more talented in our district than we were this year. But playing that night in and night out, I found that to be the biggest aha factor than some of the teams that we played in the playoffs. And it's like, we've been in this moment all season long. So our kids were prepared for it. But I do think, like that Teresa said, you do have to have those conversations with your kids, but you have to kind of know their pulse too, because kids have to feel like they're being successful, and they've got to see that. Sometimes you telling them that is not enough.
Perfect. So a couple ahas in there. I think, what James said as far as, scheduling different people so you can find your go-tos. Find those people that you're going to be able to count on when the team is put to the fire. And for me, that goes with the saying, clarity is power. Because, that allows you to see under perfect conditions what they're going to do in that. And, Deb and Teresa both talked about conversations. Another saying I have is people will grow into the conversations we create around them. So with that said, how do you sell your scheduling to your team and the leaders in your program? Because let's be honest, if you're going to play an elite schedule, you got to have elite practices day in, day out. And, one of my earlier questions was, do we push kids too far, or can we push kids too far with putting them to the fire? So with what I want to talk about here, I'll start with you, Coach Durham, is what conversations are happening in your program? What do they sound like around, this scheduling and those things?
Well, it just goes back to, I think you have to be very honest with kids, because, you take kids play with a lot of, here in the Metroplex, they play with each other on AAU teams, and they're around each other. They know who the go-to players are. So to me, I think you talk to them about those kids and their game and what they bring to the different programs. And then to me, I think kids get excited about when you have game plans like, hey, we're going to go play, DeSoto. We're going to go play Duncanville. Well, DeSoto this year, we don't have the size to do that. Our kids are scared to death because they know those kids, and they watch them play. And so, it was great to talk about, we still have to do what we do. This is going to be our strengths, and, whatever they have, but let's make a game plan. And I think you sell it because you show kids that this is who we are and this is what we do. But we're going to make this adjustment and we're going to do this or that. And I think kids understand it. It makes the game fun, and we tell kids, we're not always going to be successful, but when we try something, then we can come back and watch a film and show them why we lost, what we didn't do a good job of, what we did a good job of, how maybe we took certain players out of a game or whatever. And I think that's basketball, because, we can all have these great plans, but we all know that once the game started, it doesn't always work out that way. So you better have a plan B and C and, whatever, because again, just like on this call, there's a ton of awesome coaches that are smart. They're a lot smarter than me. They're a lot smarter than sometimes our staff, because we think we have a good plan. And then it's like by halftime, it's like, ooh, this doesn't work. And so, I think you sell your scheduling because you tell them that we have to be prepared. If we see it in the preseason and lose, we're going to get up, the next morning, we're going to come to practice, and it's okay. We have more games to play. If that happens in the playoffs, then we're going to off season. And so again, I think you talk to them, you educate them through video, and you you just keep talking and preaching, and it becomes who they are. And I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but that's what we do.
Okay. No, that totally answers the question. Deb, what conversations are you guys having around, Coach made a good point, and I meant to bring it out, is, our kids are playing with 20 other kids, and they're going to 6 or 7 or 8 different programs maybe, and you're putting your kids to the fire every day in practice, every Tuesday and Friday. You're putting them up against the best, and their friends over at another school sitting at 13-0, feeling really good about themselves. I've got to think kids think, what the hell is my coach? Why are they doing this to me? So what are those, I'm trying to get to those conversations you're having with those kids, Coach Harris.
Well, I think we probably have a little bit different approach, because I rarely have more than maybe 2 kids that are big into the AAU at one time. So we spend, and I spend a lot of time kind of battling that whole AAU or club basketball and high school basketball. So in our district, particularly on our campus, we spend a lot of time talking about educational athletics and the difference between educational athletics and club basketball. And yes, we have to service our elite athletes. Teresa's got a little different situation, because she's got tons of kids that are elite that are playing at high levels. And that's a whole nother challenge. But we have conversations with our kids, and I feel like we get buy-in, because we talk about, this has to be as good of an experience for the kid that I have that is never going to touch a basketball when they leave McKinney High School than it has to be for the kid that is going to play basketball in college. So I think we get buy-in from everybody, and everybody understands that we're all on the same page. If you just kind of, for me, it's been my experience, if I'm just talking to my higher end kids about, hey, what this is and what that is, I'm missing 90% of the kids in my program, because I don't have very many of those kids. So I do think that you have to have honest conversations, but I think when you involve everybody in what we're not about wins and losses. I'm as competitive as anybody, but I'm not going to count my success on how many games that I win. I'm chasing kids. I'm trying to change lives. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. And, I know that's not real exciting stuff for a lot of people that want to talk X's and O's, but that's just kind of who we are and who our heart is. And we just have those honest conversations.
At the end of the day, I feel all of you are, you're just building leaders. You're just using basketball to do that. So I don't think it is all X's and O's. And that's why I've tried to focus this panel on these discussions and not X's and O's. Very good, though, Deb. James, what conversations are you guys having at SOC, around this adversity you're obviously, putting your kids through your scheduling and just explaining it to them?
Well, and that's the big thing, the communication, and you're so right. The communication is so important, to the point that we explain every game and why we schedule it, definitely to the kids. And I have these conversations with some parents too. I'm at the age now, I don't mind talking to parents. When I was younger, I didn't want to talk to parents about anything about what we did. But right now, I'm at a comfortable age where I can, talk to the parents. This is why we schedule this team. This is why we schedule this team. And so we have to constantly talk about that to the kids. Tom mentioned a while ago with playing coach, a coach over at Highland Park, Coach Peeler. This year we scheduled Coach Hill over at Jesuit. And we like road games. This year we're going to take some home games because we just moved back into a brand new facility, and it's great too. We've never had this experience at South Oak Cliff, where we're actually, if you play us now, you're actually going to have to come in the Oak Cliff onto the campus to play a game, which makes a difference, because it makes a big difference when you go into Jesuit and that student section is sitting right on your back. You go into Highland Park and the student section is right across. That makes a difference. And it gives you everything that you ever wanted. And so we have to constantly explain to the kids about why we're scheduling this team or that team and stuff like that. Mike Tyson, famous quote, everybody has a plan until you get hit in the mouth. We want to get hit in the mouth as often as possible in preseason. So we'll know exactly what we have to do, because this makes us better as coaches, because adjustments are a big part of what we do. If we're playing the same after halftime, and if we're in a competitive game that we were in the in the first half, then we're not doing our job as coaches. And so we need to get hit in the mouth, you know, constantly to make us a better team. And so we have to constantly do that. I like that, and I like this. I like this so much. I like the morning after, you know, not in the regular sense, but the morning after a loss. I love it when we took that loss on a Friday and we got to bring them in. I want to bring them in Saturday morning, probably around, you know, 9 or 10. And I want to gauge their mentality. I want to gauge their personalities. I want to see, what did that loss do to you last night? I want to see if I lost my team. That's important, because sometimes coaches don't realize you could actually lose a team before you even realize it. All right, down. You need to gauge that, but the only way you can gauge that, they have to be put in that position where you do take those tough losses. You know, this past year we had a rough run. We scheduled Dunbar. This during the Christmas break. We right after the DISD holiday tournament was so competitive. Lancaster won it again this year. We had Dunbar right after the tournament. Then we turned around and we played Faith Family, which was his last year's state champion. And then that was that Saturday. Then we turned around Dunbar Tuesday, Faith Family that Friday, and then we turned around and played Madison that Monday, the state championship. We played 2 back-to-back state champions and a highly competitive Dunbar team program as usual. Those are the kind of scheduling that we need, and we learned something out of each and every one of those games. We actually went 1 and 2 during that stretch. Should have beat Faith Family, lost on the last second shot, and you know they made the state tournament this year. So we need to play those type of games with that type of schedule, and we need to talk about it all the time. I'm talking about after every single game, win or lose, especially doing film. We need to talk about the hows and the whys and the causes of this, causes of that, because as coaches, I feel like we gotta keep a constant pulse on our players, especially our leaders, our best players. We gotta keep a pulse on them, because their attitude can permeate the rest of the team. And if it's a positive attitude, then that's a good thing for you. But if it's a negative thing, you could lose your team. And so you have to put them in a position, and you have to keep great communication with those leaders on that team. You have to keep communication with everybody, but especially those leaders, because you have to understand they drive the mentality of that team. So those are the type of things. Let me give you one more thing, caveat on that bad record that you may get from playing a preseason schedule. If you plan on being very good, and say for instance you make the state tournament, this happened to us twice. If you make the state tournament with a bad record, you draw the best team. The state of Texas seeding system, once you get to state, is terrible. Playoff seeding is terrible. But anyway, it's an advantage if you have the worst record going into the state tournament, which means you draw the best team first. And you're better than your record. They're not better than their record. Their record is probably true. If you win that first game, that semifinal game, that means you're going to have a less competitive championship game. And if you can just get to that game 9 times out of 10, you can be successful. And this happened to us. This happened to us 2 out of the 4 times that we've actually won championships there. But those state championship games were blowouts. In fact, they were over by the first half. And so scheduling, it can become an advantage. But you like to say it again, Coach Harris said this, you have to be real cognizant of what type of team you're dealing with that particular year, because you might not be able to schedule as hard. If you have a great team, schedule as hard as you possibly can.
Okay. Coach Inman, along the same line, let's go back to 2005, the year you won state. I know that year you were sitting at 8-5 after 13 games, and I know most people had already written you off, but can you just tell us a little bit what those conversations in your program sounded like during that 8-5 time?
Well, I got kind of lucky at Plano, because when those kids who won state were freshmen, they were already watching kids who were successful teams. And they all said they wanted to win state. And I said, man, y'all are talking a bunch of noise. If you really want to win state, are you willing to do the work? So I made a note to myself. I love Martin Luther King. And one of my favorite quotes is when he talks about the subtle prejudice of low expectations. I don't have low expectations. I'm not getting up in the morning and drinking the gallons of coffee I drink and putting the effort I put into it to maybe win district. I'm here to win a state championship. Now, am I going to do it? Probably not. Statistically, you're not going to win. But is that all you're playing for is average? I'm not playing for average. So what I would always tell these kids is, listen, I can schedule anyone. We can play anyone anywhere we want. And if you're a good team, a bad team has wins and losses. A good team has wins and learns. Make a difference. Because if you lose that game and you can go back and look at why you lost that game, now you learn something right now down the road, because your job as a coach is to give them exposure to everything they're going to see. See man, see zone, see pressure, see no pressure, even front zone, odd front zone, exotic defenses. And if you don't do that, you can't blame those kids for choking up down the road because they never saw what was coming. It's your job to make sure they see it coming. So then again, back to Plano, what I said with these kids was, I said, listen, we're going to play a really tough schedule, because if you guys really think you're going to win state, how do you think you're going to win it? By playing a bunch of clowns? I said, we're Plano. And just like you're going to say, we're Allen, we're South Oak Cliff, we're McKinney, we're whoever we are. But if you're going to develop a toughness and a culture, you can do that by telling them, look, man, you're going to play this. Because one note I wanted to make sure that the young coaches in particular pay attention to, you got to be a little careful on scheduling, because you can't play all the state ranked teams at times you're good and then drop out later, because you can't always get back on those people's schedules. There's an ebb and flow to it. So sometimes, like, we don't have contracts like they do in college where they have a 2-year, home and home signed contracts, but there's a lot of gentlemen's agreements. And like, I can't play James on the good years if I'm not willing to go down and get pounded on the bad years, because first of all, he might not like that I'm doing that to him. And even if he didn't care, I might not be able to get back into that slot, because there's a lot of scheduling slotting. So be a little bit careful. And, if you really do aspire for greatness, you may have to take even bigger lumps on the average years. But again, you can't schedule every year just the way you want it to be. But that's my attitude, was there's wins and learns. We learned something. John Robertson was a great finisher at the rim, a great 3-point shooter. And at that point in his life, he didn't have a mid-range game. And when we played James, they were down about 17 points with about a minute and a half left, and I called timeout. And I said, guys, listen, we're not going to win this game. I got news for you. There's no 17-point play. This ain't going to happen. I said, but I want you to look around. There's a beautiful arena. This is the kind of place you play in when you play at state. These are the kind of people you play when you play at state. And I said to John, hey, John, let me ask you a question. I said, how big do you think Shady is? He said, about 6'10", coach. I said, hey, he's going to be 6'10" the next time your knucklehead over-penetrates and sticks the ball in his armpit. Okay, so the point was, John thought he could always finish at the rim against everyone, not against Darrell Arthur at 6'9", 6'10". So we had to talk the next day. I said, John, did you learn anything last night? He said, yeah, I think I really need to work on that mid-range game, you said. Because then he got dangerous, because now John would break off and he hit the elbow real hard. Now, if a guy like Darrell Arthur comes up, John throws the lob, he throws a bounce pass, we get a dunk, a layup, right? If he doesn't come up, John's 15-footer, you'll suffer a quick death if you let that kid shoot open 15-footers for long. So I think he learned, and it's funny because the only reason I mentioned that story was he and I had a talk just the other day. And I said, man, you survived me. You wanted in spite of me. You got good in spite of me. And he said, no. He said, you taught me how to put up with toughness. You made me take a charge, and you made me acknowledge mid-range game. Well, if we're playing people that have 6'2" postmen instead of 6'9" postmen who play for 12 years in the NBA, John's still trying to stick it in the armpit of every oversized kid who can block a shot. So there's growth for the individual. There's growth for the team. There's growth for even the next level. Of the rare occasion you get a kid to play to the next level. But I think you have to try to make them proud of being tough. It takes a tough guy to step in the ring and get knocked out, because everyone else who sits around what is it? The man of the arena speech. Are y'all familiar with that speech? It takes a lot of courage to be the man of the arena. Everyone else sits up there in their $5 seat with their $5 attitude, watching you and criticizing you. Hey, I'd rather be the second toughest guy in the ring than the toughest guy outside of it. So schedule tough.
I appreciate that. Some ahas around this conversation. First, if you check your chat, Coach Reshaw from Prosper had put kind of his thoughts over here on how he tries to schedule, which I think is very interesting. Some games they can win if they play well, games they should lose, even when they play their best. And some of those, I think that's a great philosophy. So thanks for sharing that. Any of you that want to share ideas, please do. It'll give all of us, more ideas. So around the conversations, I think the point is it's just very important to have conversations with your team about these things. They can't think that coach is just taking them out to dry or something of that nature. And then also, I think you have to prepare them for it. You can't have subpar practices and go out and try to play an elite schedule. So, Coach Inman, to kick off this next little round, would you please repeat your quote for the audience from our conversation the other day when we were talking about adversity?
Yeah, it's
being tougher, excuse me.
Sure. I learned from my father not to use 4 words: always, never, all, and none. They don't lead to nuanced conversations, and they're usually just lazy. It's lazy rhetoric, right? So I'm not going to say all millennials are soft. What I will say is, generally speaking, the millennials are softer. And I would also say, generally speaking, the game of basketball has gotten softer. I think it's perimeter based. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of weak coaching. I don't want to tell a kid he can't shoot the 3. Well, if you don't make 35%, you're not shooting the 3 on my team. And at the end of the day, what I was talking about to Michael was, I said, I don't like the game has gotten soft, and I don't like that the kids have gotten softer. But if you believe in toughness and you believe in physicality, for instance, doesn't it even offer you a bigger premium than ever if you'll insist on doing it? Like a story. Matt Painter from Purdue is an old friend of mine. I knew him because he lived with my cousin. And I was talking to Matt one time, and he's famous for playing 2 bigs. He'll have a 7'3" guy with a 6'11" guy, and they're not very athletic, but they're big, right? And I said, hey, Paint, I said, do you ever match small? And I won't say it, but he says, F matches small, Tom. I don't match small. They match big. Because he said, okay, yeah, Isaac Haas at 7'3" has a hard time going out and guarding a guy in the perimeter, so he plays off him a step or two. Well, guess what? That 6'8" guy can't guard Isaac Haas in the post either. So the whole idea that we just give into this Mike D'Antoni crap they run down in Houston, where somebody beats the air out of the ball and then somebody wings up a 3 and they hope they get lucky. If you can insist on still getting quality touches, insist on making people earn the 3 and play some physical basketball, I think it's even more powerful than ever because of the disparity. So I would encourage you guys. I'm really not, I told my wife when I retired, I said, I want you to buy 2 yard signs. I want one that's going to say, turn the music up really loud. And the other one's going to say, stop the crap out of my grass. Because I don't care. I'm not a back in the day guy. I don't give a crap. I really don't. But the game's gotten softer. And if your team can get better by not letting them be soft, hats off to you.
Okay, so, Tom and I's discussion basically, was circling around a lot. What he touched on there is, if the game's getting softer and it's more of a run and shoot game, we both feel that physicality can negate that to some degree. And so if you can make your team more physical, then you're going to beat that curve, I personally feel. My teams at North the last couple of years, the reason I liked them was we could press you 94 feet the whole game if we wanted to, but we also won a lot of games 40-37. We didn't have to try to win that way, but it was the way we like to try to win. So I just got a couple more things. We're going to go a little over an hour if these panelists can, because the next thing I want to talk about is things aren't always as they appear. And so based on that, knowing this simple truth that things aren't always as they appear, as a leader of your program and your team, how do you try to look into the future and foresee these coming thunderbolts, is what Pat Riley called them in The Winter Within, which is one of my favorite books. He referred to adversity as thunderbolts. He talked about how a weatherman is looking out at the weather. Right now, we've got scientists trying to figure out what this COVID-19 is going to do. As a head coach, you got to be looking out into the future, looking for adversity to stem it off. So Coach Mays, you spoke a little bit about it. So if you'll just go ahead, continue just a little bit, and then Coach Durham will get your thoughts as well.
Well, obviously, the biggest thing that all of us have to deal with now is the COVID-19, this situation where we're not doing what we normally do. We normally are preparing for another season. We're normally in spring leagues by now. Kids are deep in their AU. Right now, since all of that is taken away, it's imperative that we all find alternative ways to continue to prepare for a season. This virtual meeting format that we went to, we take advantage of this, as a group, and I'm sure you do. We have team meetings at least twice a week. I know some coaches have more, but I don't want to, have our kids burn out on this method either. Having to get on every day, and I'm watching them. We do Tuesdays and Fridays, and we get on. We talk about the day. One of the good things that we've talked about, the Last Dance with Michael Jordan. I almost said Michael Jackson. Michael Jordan. This has been a great series. I mean, we've had some deep conversations about this particular documentary because it relates so heavily between us. And I'm sticking on the line of what's coming how we have to prepare for the year, trying to get timelines, which we don't have a handle on right now, and when we'll be back. They're constantly asking me, Coach, when can I get to the gym? Can we get to the gym? I have to constantly give them a message. The district hasn't approved that we go into the gym. I mean, all of these things that we have to do. But I guess the bottom line, the message I want to send that all of us right now have to get creative in the platform and formats that we have right now to continue to prepare team, because this is definitely not normal. This is the new normal. That we've entered ourselves into. So going once back again, that we've talked about before, communication is a big piece. You could easily lose a player during this time. If I'm guessing right, and I'm just saying, I'm just being transparent. It's going to be a lot of movement with transfers after we come out of this, because some coaches have lost contact with kids, and kids are wondering, and parents are wandering around, shopping, all that kind of stuff is going on right now. And so, this thing right here has really thrown all of us for a loop. But I like I said again, as a coach, especially a coach, normally if you're a type of coach that make great adjustment, halftime adjustment coaches, you coaches, you're going to do wonderful during this period of time, because right now you're making adjustments. And that's what's going to call for right now, making adjustments off the court now. And so these are things that help us weather the storm when it comes to quote unquote thunderbolts. Things that are coming out of the blue that we have no control over, but we still have to deal with on a daily basis.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think it was last week when we were just specifically talking about building culture. I believe I said, there's going to be some coaches that are going to wake up in a month and they're going to see the culture they tried to build or that they built for 5, 10, 15 years can disappear like that. You got to fight for that culture every single day. And right now, I think probably every single minute. Coach Durham.
So I'll just second everything that James said. I mean, you have to definitely be creative. I think as a coach, I think that's why most of us are successful, is because that we do embrace change, because you can't just do it like you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I think it's keeping in constant contact with kids coming up in your program, from the middle school, your middle school coaches, your high school coaches, you can plan. And I think most of it does come down to planning in relationships. And when you have those in place, then, you can weather these storms. It may not be ideal. This isn't what we want, but you just find a way, to get it done. It may not be pretty. It may not be what we want, but, we just have to go with the flow. So, just keep being creative and keep working, because ultimately, you keep making contact, you keep just doing those little things. And right now that's all we can do until, we're just in a holding pattern, and none of us do that very well, but, we're having to learn too.
Okay. Coach Inman, when you were coaching, how are you looking out into the future, looking for issues and adversity coming up? I think you had a real keen eye for those things.
Well, I mean, I'm older than a lot of you guys, and so I saw a lot of the, if you want to call it the poaching of players, coming on a long time ago, and I'm not a very trustful person. I'm a little cynical, and all of it together adds up to you better build a fence around pretty good players, because someone's trying to break in the hen house and steal them. And James made a very valid point. I made a note to myself about this, kind of a corny phrase. Y'all probably laugh at me because a guy like me is not supposed to say stuff like this. But nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. They don't care that you've written a book. They don't care that you won state. They don't care if you don't give a crap about them. And I had a lot of success at Plano, because one of the misconceptions of Plano is everyone's rich and almost all of them are white and everyone's wealthy. And I had African kids. I had Indian kids. I had Chinese kids. I had kids used to drive home every day. I spent a lot of time eating at Cavino's, the Italian restaurant in Plano, because it's great food and kids got to eat. Well, when you share that time, like James mentioned that about the bonding that happens when you travel and stuff like that, it's the same sort of thing. But like Abdul Lawal, let me name drop one kid. Abdul is a kid named, everyone called him Bull, great big thick Nigerian kid. Bull's about 32 years old right now. And I used to get into his rear end with his mother's approval, because she's a tough old Nigerian lady. And we used to go back and forth. You never disrespect me, but we butted heads a lot. But he treated me like I treat my mother. My mom's a wonderful woman. She's not attractive. And I can say that, but you better not say it. She's my mother. So, Bull was like, all right, yeah, Coach Inman is a jerk, but you better not say nothing about it, because we may have to square off over this, because I had a lot of loyalty with those kids. I spent a lot of time with them. Now, part of that's because I'm a dysfunctional guy who didn't get married until he was 54, and I had that time, so it didn't make as much difference. But if you guys think that you're just going to take off this whole COVID-19 and then come back and everyone's going to be waiting there in the enrollment line, you got another thing coming. And it kind of depends on where you coach. I mean, the more isolated you are to the edges of the Metroplex, typically the less that comes into play because it involves transportation. But if you're in the middle of it, you better be if you're in the middle of the city, you better be in the middle of your program. Because if you're not in the middle of the program, you may wake up one day and you ain't got no Indians behind you.
So
I
Deb,
don't mean to be negative, not being negative, just being real. How it is. Because let me say one thing, I think everyone in this panel will agree with. High school coaching now is college coaching. You shouldn't have to recruit your own middle school kids. You shouldn't have to go out and do all this crap. College coaching, pro coaching, and pro coaching is the only pure basketball because at least we know we're getting paid. At least we know we don't give a crap because that's what it is. The old Don Olmeyer, line from the guy who first broadcast ABC. The answer to everything as always is money. Okay, well, even in high school on this level, but there's so much pressure on you. And I always told people part of the reason I retired, if you want to put college pressure on me, give me some college money. For $90 grand a year, I ain't putting up with it. For pay me $3 million a year, I might get back into the abuse line, but not for 90 grand. I'm gonna go walk my dogs. So watch out for your kids because someone else is.
all right. Yeah, I think how we show up now is how our kids are going to see us in 3 months or 4 months or a month, whenever. How you're showing up now. Coach Harris, regular school year. I know, with girls, it's so much different. I've coached boys and girls, but you can kind of get that feeling when things aren't right. So what are you doing to, foresee those things and try to cut them off before problems happen?
I think that's a loaded question. I think, for me, the biggest thing is just making sure that my kids are doing okay. I mean, we've spent little to no time talking about basketball. I mean, I haven't seen my kids since we pulled the bus up from San Antonio. And that's been hard, but I feel like, I think it's got a different, it depends on your kid, it depends on their support system at home. For me, I've just been trying to reach out to my kids and make sure that they're doing okay. I mean, I'm 48 years old and I'm struggling with this. I can't imagine what a 16, 17-year-old kid is feeling.
Right.
So I think I think if you have a relationship with kids and you have that, I couldn't coach boys for anything because of all the picking and all that. And I have a different viewpoint on that. Again, educational athletics, I'm going to coach the kids that show up to McKinney High School that are zoned for me. So I don't really worry about stuff like that. But I think it all goes back to the relationship and have to be transparent. Your parents have to know what your heart is, and they have to find value in your program well beyond the basketball part of it. And I think if you can just continually let them know that you care, like we're doing a drive-by parade this afternoon for our seniors because we want to make sure that, that they're celebrated, and just finding ways to make sure that your kids still know that you're there for them.
All right. Appreciate all of those. I think communication is probably the key there with most things. And I think throughout a normal year, we kind of all focused on the COVID-19 and right now, but during a regular season, I think those leader meetings you're having with your captains, I always videoed all of our games from the opposite side of the bench so I could watch that bench, because that's how I could see adversity, team issues coming up to try to take care of those before it affected our culture. Yourselves eavesdrop on your thoughts. Another saying I firmly believe in. What we think about, we become. So what I'm going to finish this panel up with today is this question. So I'd like to finish up with, because I believe this is so important for us to talk about today. It's easy for kids, it's easy for adults, it's easy for business owners, it's easy for teachers, it's easy for us in life to fall into the trap of victim mentality. You're putting your teams up against great teams night in and night out. You're putting good players up against each other every day in practice, and you're preaching compete, compete, compete. So how do we're obviously going to have some losses. How do we guard against victim mentality? It just wasn't meant to be. That's the way it goes. It wasn't our time. We've all heard that crap. How do you guard against that victim mentality? And I consider it a mindset flaw. I mean, I think that's a flaw. Well, how do we guard against it? How do we teach it? Coach Durham.
I get the hard question here.
Sorry.
I don't know. I just don't believe in that. I think you go every day, you wake up and I go to work. I mean, you know, I try to model everything that I believe in for my kids. Like Coach Saul is one of my coaches. I know is on here. Like we're up every morning, 5 o'clock. We go work out. And then, you know, like during season, it's an hour workout. And then we're running, showering, getting to the gyms and going to work. And I don't believe in excuses. I mean, you know, it is what you make it. And dude, let's go play. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't believe in giving yourself an outlet. I know you can, I mean, I always feel like if my kids didn't do well, then I didn't prepare well, that I should have worked harder and did something or had somebody say it a different way, or I don't know. I just think your kids will take on who you are. And if you're that way, if you give them an excuse, then they're going to have an excuse.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I go, just like Tom said, I want to win a state championship every year, and I guess I believe that, but I want to know every single day I did my best. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's all we can ask from our kids. That's all we can ask from ourselves, because we all know so many things have to happen right that are out of your control. So I just preach to our kids, control what you can control. You control your attitude and your effort. And after that, you know, you give me your very best and you have a positive attitude, that's a win, you know, and when enough people have the right attitude, good things are going to happen. I just believe that.
Great answer, Coach. T.I.
I used to put on the front of my practice jerseys, you know, the reversibles. On the back of it, it said play hard. On the other side, it said no excuses. And I used to tell them, they said, why do you do that, Coach? I said, because pretty much everything can be fixed by those two things. If you'll play hard and not make excuses, we'll be okay. And where we're not going to be okay is where we can't fix it anyway. But playing hard and not making excuses is a nice thing to put on the back of a jersey. But I made a couple of notes. Number one is don't be a front runner as a coach. Because if you're a cheerleader, then when you're 13-0, tell them how awesome they are. And when they're 0-13, kick them like a dog because you're really mad at them. Either that or be a smart coach and realize when you're 13-0, that's when you better be doing your best coaching because they're about to slip. And at 0-13, you better find a way to get those kids to believe in themselves, because you can get all mad. You know, you can throw all your rings around and all your trophies around and say, you're not up to our nice people. Guess what? This is your guys, coach. And that's who you got this year, whether you do or don't like it. And I've always been a contrarian my whole life. Everything about my life, the way I invest in things, the way I coach basketball, the way I live is contrarian. I don't do what other people do. And so I'd always ask a kid when they first started playing for me, I said, let me ask you a question. When do you think I'll be a bigger jerk? When we're on a 7-game winning streak or 7-game losing streak? And they're all idiots. Of course, they say, oh, 7-game losing streak. I said, you're an idiot. I'll ask you that question in 2 years. And the answer is, when they're 7-0, you better check them, because we're not going to get to 8-0 if they get lazy and sloppy. But at 0-7, well, yeah, you're right. Kick them while they're down. That'll make you feel really, really good. And don't be a bully. I mean, that's just taking your problems out on people. If you got problems, reconcile your problems. But if you got problems with your team, fix your team. I think James said it. The day after a loss is critical. My fondest memory of Plano is we had absolutely no support facility. So I swept the floor every day for years and years and years. And I used to love to come in the old days with those old lights that took forever to get warm, or, you know, to warm up and show the light. And I'd walk and I'd sweep the floor. I'm really weird. I love to sweep the floor, right? And after a loss, these kids would come in and they'd like try to, no, all right, don't worry about it. But I needed them to see I'm okay. So I'm not any different than I'd be Saturday if we won. We didn't win. What do you want me to do? What are we supposed to do? Cry, curl up and get fetal? Just shut up and go to practice. Because I wasn't going to throw a party or we weren't going to have a parade for you if you won last night. So let's not have a funeral today because you lost. Time to move on. Next play, next game, next week, whatever. But you got to keep moving on. And then the last thing is, my dad's an alcoholic. He's been in AA chapter for 40 years, and I'm really proud of him. And they use the serenity prayer a lot. So I'll take the secular part out, or I'll make it secular, I should say, and say, you know, God grant me the strength to change the things I can, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, but most importantly, the wisdom to know the difference. And I don't think, I used to always ask whenever my kid was a leader, I'd ask him a question. I would say, when it's all said and done, at the end, like I'd ask him to try to help me get where we want to go. I need you to help me have this conversation with that guy, because he can't always hear it from me. He can't always hear it from you. And I would say, well, you know, Coach, I'm not all that comfortable talking. I said, let me ask you a question. When you're out of here in 6 months or 2 years or 5 years, would you rather they said you said too much, or would you rather they said you said too little? And if you don't get that point, you're an idiot. I'd always rather I said too much. And I usually do say too much, but at least you can't say I didn't tell you. You can't say, well, I thought they understood. Understand, they're teenagers. We're grown-ups who are depending on our mortgages and our cars with a bunch of knucklehead teenagers who are going through hormonal crisis. You know, you better explain it to them. You better take the time. And I say that with a smile. I love teenagers. They're knuckleheads, but better take the time. Control what you can control. Don't take your problems out of your kids, you know, because at the end of the day, I always make an analogy of the basketball is like the Kentucky Derby, right? Kentucky Derby, you got 12 beautiful horses. You got 12 little guys and jockeys in their ugly little outfits. And at the end, you only see one guy. He's the one who gets the 150 red roses. And the other 11 guys go back to the shed and they shovel the horse crap, you know? And my point being, none of us are ever going to win state without great players. You know, you can help, you know, you can make a good team better than good. You can make maybe a good team great or a great team, you know, a championship. But at the end of the day, we all need good players. None of us are very good jockeys when we're riding a mule. So the years you get stuck with a mule, be nice to the mule because they're the only mule you got. So.
All right. Coach Harris, how do you fight against victim mentality?
I think it structures around everything that you do in your program. We're constantly telling our kids that you've got to let weak people get walked on in life. If you're physically weak, mentally weak, spiritually weak, or emotionally weak. Life is hard for everybody, but it's a lot harder for the weaker people. We tell our kids all the time, like my kids know I'm never going to take their side with the teacher. They can never come to me and explain their side of the story and think that I'm going to take their side. It doesn't mean that I think the teacher's right, but the teacher is the adult, and I have that communication with my kids. So it's in everything that we practice. You're never going to disrespect an official. You know, you're never going to, you know, act like an idiot. It's not how we do things. So I just think it's your culture, and you have to model that for your kids, and you have to be consistent, you know, and then they take pride in that. You know, we've had shirts some years that says soft is not a compliment, you know, and nobody wants to be called soft. And I think that once they get that and they see, you know, physically that, and I think, you know, Teresa talked about the weight room earlier, that's a big part of it. And sometimes it's hard to get girls to buy into that. I feel like it's getting a little bit easier because they're starting to see how successful they can be if they're physically strong. So we talk about that on a daily basis, that weak people get walked on and life is harder for the weak, but you've got to balance all of it. It's not just about physical, but most importantly, your mindset.
Right.
Perfect. Coach Mays?
Real quick, you know, at our spot, at our community, growing up in the city, we can afford to have excuses. We try to pair and run our basketball program, not as a program, but as rites of passage for boys. We work obviously with mainly African-American boys, and we just can't focus just on the basketball. You're setting them up for failure for life. And so what we try to do is just basically have a rites of passage for the 4 years that they're there, 3 years, 2 years, however long. Just the rites of passage, and this is dealing with everything from on the court issues to off the court issues, especially with teachers. Like what Debbie just said, we have a make friends, not enemies policy with our players and teachers. We don't go in classrooms and make enemies with teachers. We're trying to make friends. A friend will pass you quicker than an enemy will. You know, if it's dealing with a grade, stuff like that. We don't tolerate any negative behavior. We pride ourselves on discipline, win or lose on the court. You always see a well-disciplined South Oak Cliff team, a tough team, but well-disciplined, not out there with nonsense. And so we have to be very careful as far as how we deal with our kids every day. No excuses. See, if they develop an excuse mentality, it could be a life or death situation with our kids. And to be honest, in the communities they grew up in. So they have to get it done. They don't have a choice, you know, and then we're there to help them get it done. While any support means that we have, we got to help them get through this, because like I said, again, it's not just about basketball at the end of the day. We're trying to develop young men who eventually become productive citizens that can take care of families, that can take care of kids, where they don't kids, they don't run out on their spouse. Anything you get there to get it done. And so we try to take this approach, and of course it transfers over to basketball too. No excuses. You got to get it done on the court. You got to make this play. You got to be where you're supposed to be. You got to play as hard as you can. You got to play for your team. So that whole deal about no excuses is really a daily ritual that we do daily. on and off the court. And it has to be that way because we're dealing with lives now, not just basketball.
I think that's a great answer, Coach Mays. I think it's been very interesting to see how the different coaches from the suburbs look at adversity compared to how Coach Mays looks at adversity. You know, he's kind of got adversity built into his program. He's more of a supporter to help kids understand it and get through it. I think in the suburbs, sometimes we have to build that adversity into their lives because sometimes they do have it. Nobody's life's easy, but easier. So, yeah, it's been so interesting, the panel, just the different views of that. So I want to thank all of you again from the bottom of my heart. I'm so grateful for you guys sharing this knowledge. I know, we had about 40 people on earlier, and I know they all got great value from this. Got to thank all of you that's been on these calls. This is the 4th week. Some of you have been on every single week. Appreciate you supporting it. I'm going to get these loaded up to a YouTube channel, which is Success Never Rests. If you want to write that down, you basically can Google Success Never Rests. I think that YouTube channel comes up pretty quick. So I'll have these panels up there, have all the one-on-one interviews. Like I said before, we're going to take next week off for TABC. I know you guys will all be tied up listening to all those great coaches. And then I want to try to get you back because I really think the most value is you guys talking to each other, not always listening to college coaches. We're all on different levels. So I'll do the raffle, get that information out to the winner. And I guess I will see you guys in a few weeks. Once again, thanks so much. Thank you guys for all joining. Coach Harris, Coach Mays, Coach Durham, Coach Inman. Is beautiful. Do any of you have anything to add before we leave?
Everyone be safe and stay healthy.
Okay.
Good luck to all you guys next year. I hope everyone has a great season. I hope you guys deal with the curveballs that are coming at you. I'm kind of lucky to be sitting on a couch watching it happen instead of you guys having to deal with it. But I'm on your side. I wish you guys the best of luck.
Everybody also keep Kit and her program, in your prayers and your thoughts, and I'm sure all that'll be coming out. So appreciate all y'all again. Have a good one. We'll see you soon. Thanks, Coach.